Steve Andreas, Six Blind Elephants, Volume 2, Page 4, Chapter Model of the World. Whenever someone is stuck in a problem or limitation, they are categorizing it in a way that isn't useful in resolving it. However, they are usually also categorizing this categorization at a higher logical level as the only way to do it. The problem is that she wants to control me, and that's a fact. Implication is particularly useful in gracefully and gently making a distinction between how the world is, which we can never know directly or completely, and how we perceive it, think about it, understand it, or interpret it. What has often been called the map/territory distinction. Our experience is always only a map of the territory, although we can sometimes come very close to it. We can never completely know the territory itself. Different communication patterns that elicit a distinction between our map and the reality that the map describes have been grouped together under the name Model of the World. I want you to have an experience of these different patterns before discussing them. Think of some specific problem or limitation you have, or imagine being someone else that you know who has a specific limitation. And imagine expressing this problem to someone else in a brief statement. For example, my husband never thinks about the social consequences of what he says. Then notice your internal experience of this sentence. Then notice how your experience changes when you imagine someone responding to you with one of the interventions on the list below. Pause after each one so you can notice the impact of each. The blank indicates where you would insert the statement that you made about the problem. It can be even better if you ask a friend to read these responses to you one at a time. A. So it seems to you that blank, in parentheses, your husband never thinks about the social consequences of what he says. B. So the way you see the situation, your husband never thinks about the social consequences of what he says. C. So for you, the problem is your husband never thinks about the social consequences of what he says. D. So you think that your husband never thinks about the social consequences of what he says. E. So now you feel that your husband never thinks about the social consequences of what he says. F. So your experience of this situation is that your husband never thinks about the social consequences of what he says. Rising inflection at end indicating a question. G. So your understanding is your husband never thinks about the social consequences of what he says. Statement of the problem in quotes, quotes. H. So for you, the way you see it now, the problem is that your husband never thinks about the social consequences of what he says, with rising inflection at the end. So for you, the way you see it now, the problem is that now that you have an experience of an example of hearing these different responses, let's examine each of them to see how they work. They appear to be simply statements that match or paraphrase someone's experience. Yet, each is actually also a subtle intervention. Each of them gently implies that there are other ways to perceive or understand the same events without overtly saying so. This always results in an expansion of scope beyond someone's present experience. A. Unreality predicate. Notice what happens in your mind when you make an image of a car and then say to yourself, "That seems to be a car," or "That might be a car." When I do this, my image becomes wavy and insubstantial, as if I'm looking at it underwater. But there are many other ways to represent uncertainty. For some, the image becomes somewhat transparent, fuzzy, or flat, or as if it were a cardboard cutout. B. Awareness or description predicate. In a similar way, picturing a situation is a little different from how the situation is. Any word like view, see, describe, think about, understand, etc. implies that you could also perceive or categorize an event in a different way. When you say that it appears to be a car or looks like a car, the implication is that it is not really a car. C. Self/other. Saying, "For you, blank," implies that some other person might have a very different perception or understanding. D. Tonal emphasis. Take any simple sentence, such as, "I don't like green mangoes," and say it to yourself as you would normally say it. Then repeat this sentence, noticing how your experience changes when you emphasize the word "I." Then emphasize the second word "don't," and notice how that changes your experience. Then do the same with each following word in turn. Whenever a word is emphasized, it implies alternative possible scopes. When the "I" is emphasized, the listener's attention is drawn to others. When the "don't" is emphasized, "do" is elicited. "I don't" makes me think others do. makes me think others do. When like is emphasized, it makes us think of other responses that are the opposite of liking, disgusting, rejection, lack of taste, etc. When like is emphasized, of other responses. When green is emphasized, I think of ripe, and when mangoes is emphasized, I think of other fruit. These different alternatives imply that there is more than one possible way to experience an event. E. Time. When any reference to time is emphasized, it makes us think of other scopes of time when our response might have been very different. So that's how you thought of it at the time that it happened. So that's how you thought of it at the time it happened. Implies that now it is possible to think of it in a different way. How long have you thought about it in this way? Implies that there was an earlier time when you thought about it differently. How will you think about this 5 years from now? Elicits the same implication about the future. F. Questioning tonal shift. In English, a rise in tonal inflection at the end of a sentence indicates a question, even when the communication is grammatically a statement. A question is overtly a request for confirmation or more information, but it also implies that there is some uncertainty or ambiguity about the content being discussed. G. Quotes. Quotations can simply indicate that someone said something, as in, yesterday Joe said, "I like learning about implication." But quotes can also be used to imply that someone else might describe an event differently. So the quoted description may be inaccurate. Quotes can be clearly indicated by using a sentence structure that introduces a statement that someone else made, as in, Susie said blank. Pausing briefly before the beginning of a quote can help identify it as one, and using an accent or some other very different tone of voice can clearly indicate that a sentence was originally spoken by someone else. H. Combination. All these different patterns of implication can be used together for even greater impact, as in the example given after H in the list above. Practicing these patterns in a playful way can make these skills an automatic part of your communication. A format of an exercise that you can do with others appears on the facing page Model of the world exercise. Trios, 20 minutes. 1. Problem. A thinks of a problem or limitation, or role-plays someone else with a limitation, and then makes a brief statement about it. A pauses to notice how she/he represents this problem internally. 2. Backtrack. B first makes a simple backtrack statement or paraphrase of what A said, and then indicates to C which category of model of the world pattern to use from the list on page 5 and 6 by pointing to it silently. 3. Intervention. C makes a backtrack statement that uses an example of the kind of pattern specified by B. 4. Response. B notices any nonverbal shifts in A, while A notices and briefly reports any changes in his/her internal experience. 5. Recycle. Go back to step 2 until all 6 individual patterns have been used. 6. Discussion. A reviews the changes in his/her experience and indicates which patterns were the most impactful. Notice if there was a cumulative effect due to the sequence of patterns. 7. Adjustments. A suggests ways for C to improve the patterns she or he offered. Changes in voice tone or tempo, wording, posture, nonverbal expression, setup, etc. C practices using this feedback to change how he or she delivers the pattern, using A as a coach. 8. Rotate positions and repeat the exercise until each person has experienced all 3 positions. Stretches to further develop your skills. A. B chooses 2 or more categories of pattern for C to use in the same sentence. B chooses 2 or more categories of pattern for C to use in the same sentence. B. A gets more exaggerated, bizarre, or psychotic with his original problem statement. These patterns are useful when communicating with people who have very fixed ideas about their categorizations of the world, and who would not appreciate any direct suggestion that the world could be understood differently. If you say, so that is how you understand the situation now, that is clearly true, and the implication is not something that they can clearly identify or take issue with. if they do notice the implication and attempt to challenge it, it is easy to simply repeat it and even embellish it. Well, that is how you understand it now, isn't it? Did you have that understanding when you were 2 years old? When the same implication is delivered in different ways over a period of time, it becomes even stronger and more persuasive, while remaining covert. Verbal implication. A verbal implication is a major part of the model of the world patterns, which we explored together with the nonverbal enhancements that can be used with them. Now I want to narrow our exploration to the verbal component alone. Unconsciously thinking of the world as being divided into 2 or occasionally 3 or more exclusive categories is an essential ingredient of most verbal implication, and often this digital dichotomy is created by negation. I am not a young man is usually understood to mean I am an old man. He's no Einstein implies the opposite. That is not her heart she's wearing on her sleeve implies that some other part of her body is. Implications often occur in the form of questions. Is the door open? Implies that the speaker would like it closed. A literal answer to "Can you answer the phone?" is yes. But most people understand that this question is an implied request to answer the phone. If someone does answer with a literal response, yes, and makes no move toward the phone, it is usually understood to be a smart aleck remark. And the implication of making a smart aleck remark is usually disrespect, superiority, or condescension. In the past, this kind of question has been called a conversational postulate, but more recently, some have called it a conversational implication. Some linguists use the term politeness pattern to describe this kind of communication because they are ways to gently and gracefully say something or make a request without overtly asking. Someone who uses them doesn't have to fully commit themselves to their request, and if the other person does not respond, that is not an overt refusal of the unspoken request. Although implications can cause trouble because they are often so ambiguous and unconscious, the same subtlety can also be used in very positive ways. Implication was used extensively and deliberately by Milton Erickson to help people make changes, and his work provides a useful arena to understand more clearly exactly how verbal implication works, so that we can use it deliberately and wisely. Here are some paraphrased examples of Erickson's therapeutic statements, with the implication in parentheses. You don't want to discuss your problems in that chair. You certainly don't want to discuss them standing up. But if you move your chair to the other side of the room, that would give you a different view of the situation, wouldn't it? From this different position, you will want to discuss your problems. This is the implication. From this different position, you will want to discuss your problems. I certainly don't expect that you will stop wetting the bed this week, or next week, or even this month. Implication is, I certainly expect that you will stop sometime soon. Your conscious mind will probably be very confused about what I'm saying. Implication: your unconscious mind will understand completely. Examining these examples, we can begin to generalize about the structure of verbal implication. First, there is a presumption of a categorical division of the world into two, or occasionally three or more, scopes or categories. Usually either or, here, there, now, later, conscious, unconscious, etc. This division is often created by negation. Second, this categorical division can exist in space, time, or events, matter and or process. Third, a statement that is made about one half of the either-or categorical division implies that the opposite is true of the other half. When you use negation in a statement, there is a further invitation to think of the world as divided into two opposites, and to think of the opposite of whatever is negated. If you look back at the examples above, you will find these three elements in each of them. Since implication is often confused with presupposition, which Erickson also used extensively, it is useful to contrast the two. Presuppositions, first, can be identified unambiguously by examining a verbal communication in written form. The simplest way to identify presuppositions is to negate the entire communication and find out what is still true. For example, take this sentence: I am glad that you have the ability to change quickly and easily. Negated, this becomes: I am not glad that you have the ability to change quickly and easily. Only gladness is negated. The rest of the sentence, you have the ability to change quickly and easily, remains true. So that is what is presupposed. The speaker creates the presupposition. The listener does not. Second, are usually passively accepted unconsciously. Third, are usually processed and responded to unconsciously, yet they can be identified consciously and challenged. Your statement presupposes that I have the ability to change quickly and easily, and I disagree. Presuppositions have been studied extensively by linguists, and 29 different linguistic patterns of presupposition in English have been identified. Implications, first, cannot be identified unambiguously by examining a verbal statement. For example, of course, it is difficult to change quickly and easily in your everyday life. The implication that is inferred, it will be easy to change quickly and easily here in my office, does not appear in the verbal statement and is difficult to notice. Second, are generated by the listener actively inferring, using their own assumptions and worldview about the events described by the words. Many of these are shared among most members of a culture, but some may be unique to a subculture or an individual. One of the most fundamental of these assumptions is that the world can be divided into two opposite categories, occasionally more than two. Third, are most always processed and responded to unconsciously, although they can be identified consciously. They can't be challenged in the same way that presuppositions can, because they do not exist in the statement. If the listener were to say, Are you saying that I can change quickly and easily here in your office? It is easy to reply, No, I only said that it is difficult to change quickly and easily in your everyday life. Isn't that true? To summarize the differences, implications are much subtler than presuppositions. They are generated actively by the listener, making an inference, using their knowledge and assumptions. They are typically processed entirely unconsciously, and they can be challenged in a way that presuppositions can. Verbal implication can be described as the gentle art of saying something by saying the opposite of what you want to imply. Creating and delivering a verbal implication. First, outcome. Identify your outcome for someone you are communicating with. What you would like to have happen. They will talk freely about personal matters. Second, opposite. Think of the opposite of this outcome. Not talking freely, keeping information secret, etc. Third, either or category. Choose space, time, or events, matter/process, as a way to divide the world into two opposite categories. Here, there, now, later, conscious, unconscious. 4. Sentence. State the opposite of your outcome in regard to the category that is not present: space, time, or event. This will imply the outcome that you want them to infer here in the present. In the examples below, the implication is presented in parentheses. Space. In your life outside this office, I'm sure that you would feel uncomfortable talking freely about private matters. In parentheses. Here in the office, you can feel comfortable talking about private matters. If you were talking to someone at work, there would be many things that you would not want to discuss at all. In parentheses. Here you can talk about anything. Time. In your first session with me, there were undoubtedly certain matters that you were not comfortable disclosing. In parentheses. In this session, you can feel comfortable disclosing anything. In your previous therapy, you may have been unwilling to talk about certain personal matters that were relevant to your problem. In parentheses. Now you are willing to talk about these matters. Events. I want you to carefully think about which matters are not relevant to your problem, and that you would like to keep entirely to yourself. In parentheses. You can talk freely about anything that is relevant to the problem. In your normal waking state, of course, there are topics that you would be very reluctant to discuss with me. In parentheses. In trance, you can easily discuss any topic. Another way of thinking about implication is that the client's concern, or objection, or reluctance is completely acknowledged, at the same time that it is described as being in a different scope, space, time, or event, where it won't interfere with your outcome. Once Erickson hypnotized a man and gave him instructions for amnesia. When the man woke up, he said defiantly, "I can recall everything that you did with me." Erickson responded, "That's right. Of course you can remember everything here in my office." Soon after that, he asked the man to come with him to the waiting room to show him an article in a magazine.